You are listening to A Path to a New You, a podcast about mental health and veterans issues. I am your host, Timothy Zarumsky. I am located in Madison, Wisconsin. I am a therapist, a psychotherapist. I do mental health and drug and alcohol. I am a veteran. I served in the United States Navy from 2001 to 2009, and I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia on the USS Mount Whitney. Today's episode of the podcast, we do have a guest by the name of Margot Nelson. She is a therapist also located in Madison, and she specializes in hoarding. But last week, I did post on my Facebook page asking people if they have questions about hoarding. And in today's episode, I will be asking those questions. And I hope you guys from learn something from this episode. Hello. So in today's podcast, I have a special guest, Margot Nelson from Courage Counseling. And one of her specialties and the topic we're going to be talking about today in this podcast is hoarding. So, hello, Margot. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. So, I did talk to you a while ago, and we came up with some questions. I posted some
Yeah.
asked questions from Facebook, and I got friends who sent me these questions, and a lot of them were really interested in this topic we're going to be talking about today. So, um, so I got what 6 or 7 questions. I just want to
Mhm.
ask and try to educate those who don't know much about hoarding, and maybe they'll learn a bit more about hoarding after this episode of this podcast. All right. So the first question I have is, what exactly triggers hoarding?
So that's a hard question because it's not one thing, but there's a number of things that correlate with hoarding disorder. There's research suggests that there's a genetic component, which makes sense. A lot of mental health issues do have a genetic component. There's also the environment that people grow up in. If you learn the behaviors, you're more likely to have the behaviors. Two of the things that I think of as triggers are scarcity. People who did not grow up with a lot often want to have more when they're able, and that more can be anything. It's a quantity that gives security. And also, um, like one of the things we saw in the pandemic is that people with no history of hoarding, there was a scarcity at the start of the pandemic, and people were like stocking up on toilet paper and buying cases of canned goods. People who had never cooked with dried beans before
Mhm.
were just hoarding them off the shelf. And I think that a lot of people can connect to, oh, I had this feeling of scarcity. And so I bought too much bread. I have never made bread, and I bought as much yeast as the grocery store had. So scarcity can be a big trigger. Also, the thing I work with the most is loss. And loss can be a whole bunch of things. Loss can be the loss of a loved one, the loss of a partner, the loss of a job, the loss of abilities. And abilities can be either mental abilities or physical abilities. Um, Oftentimes, people have a clutter issue, and then someone breaks a hip, let's say, and they no longer can stay on top of it. And so it just becomes a very exaggerated situation. Um, Loss of mental health. Um, it's really hard to sort through stuff when you can't focus because of a mental health issue. Um, some of the common mental health issues that are contributors are depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD. Um, and just because somebody has what appears to be a hoarded condition does not mean they have hoarding disorder. Oftentimes, people will have something else going on. For example, I broke a hip. I can't take out my garbage. I can't stand long enough to do my dishes. And if you go into their home and you try to take out the garbage and take out the objects that no longer function, someone might say, "Thank you. That was great. I needed help." And that isn't hoarding disorder. That's a situation that became a hoard because of other circumstances. Um, so it's a tricky. I definitely have worked with people who came to me saying, "I think I have hoarding disorder," and I worked with them, and I'm like,
Mhm.
"Nope, you don't have hoarding disorder,
Okay.
but you do have other stuff going on. So let's talk about that."
Right. Well, some of you kind of just answered some of the other questions too.
Oh,
Um,
I will elaborate more.
oh,
Don't you
sweet.
worry.
All right. All right. That's awesome. And I do remember during the pandemic too, like everybody's buying a crap load of toilet paper. And I
Yeah.
remember going to the grocery store and like there's no toilet paper. And then eventually got to the point where it says you can only get one a package of toilet paper. I know at Costco it was like that, and it's still like that. Just people are just buying stuff because they're worried about it's gonna run out. And yeah, I remember that during the pandemic. That was really interesting. It's like wow.
It It was the only time that I recall in my lifetime that they limited basic items at the grocery store. Like, you could
Hmm.
buy 2 frozen potato products. You could buy 2 packages of toilet paper. I've never seen limits like that
Yeah,
at
I
a
haven't
grocery
either.
store.
Not until the pandemic, and that's crazy. Yeah. All right. So next question I have are what are some of the characteristics of a hoarder?
So, I think that people tend to think of only negative things when it comes to hoarding, and I will touch on some of those negative things. But there's also a lot of positive that comes along with this. I find that the population is an incredibly creative population. They see potential in things, imagine ways that things could be fixed, different ways that an object could be used. Um, the three top hoarded items are paper, craft supplies, and clothing. And the reason that it's craft supplies is it's an incredibly creative population. Um, Also, the population tends to think of others. They're collecting items for other people, presents for other people, went to a yard sale and stocked up on children's clothing because they know someone with a child that age. Um, Very generous, want to have enough to share. Um, Other characteristics are they tend to be people that are holding on to the past. They don't want to let go of the past for whatever reason that may be, or else they're really preparing for the future. The hoarding that we saw with toilet paper during the pandemic was preparing for a future. And part of that future was that there was this unknown factor. Um, People that don't know, are we going to run out of food? And you see this with people who had scarcity from childhood is there's this constant food insecurity. People don't always um, get treatment for something like that. Also, as a population, um, it's hard to generalize a lot of things because we see this across a whole bunch of demographics. It's not limited to age. People will get at a crisis point when they're older, but we can trace back, oh, this was something they were doing when they were small.
Hmm.
Um, it is not an income thing. We see this across incomes. Um, it's a common thing. This is happening in roughly 1 out of 20 households. It's difficulty to get better statistics because this is a very hidden problem. People are ashamed and they don't seek help and they don't let people in their home. And so people like their nearest and dearest friends and relatives don't know this is going on.
Hmm.
Um, so those are some of the things that tend to be happening for a person.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So another question is why do some people hoard?
So there's a bunch of different reasons, and some of them I did touch on,
Mhm.
but it's really individual. When I work with people, I try to find out what is it that's going on, what is the benefit of having this stuff, what created this situation for you, and like I said, it was genetic, it's environmental, um, it is the scarcity, it is the loss, and there is the big X factor of we don't really know. because even though there are these factors, lots of people have loss and don't hoard.
Mhm.
Lots of people have the genetic component and don't hoard. So it's really unclear across the board. We can see correlations. There's definitely correlations.
Mhm.
Um, but we don't can't narrow it down to why is this happening? And I think that's a really big question that I get a lot of phone calls about. People will say, "Why is my loved one doing this?" Um, and people struggle with, if I don't understand the why, I can't accept and I can't help. And so I think when you talk about why do some people hoard, there needs to be an emphasis on accepting that people hoard.
Mhm.
I think that you had a good question, but I think that when relatives are asking the question,
Yeah.
they're struggling to accept
Yeah.
without having a better understanding.
Right. That makes
To
sense.
so many people, it's like, why would you keep that? That is a useless item. Throw that out.
Right.
Well, it's important to that person that's holding on to it. And so you need to accept it and work with them from where they are.
Right. And what are some symptoms of hoarding?
So I do want to go through the symptoms, but I also want to touch on what hoarding is not.
Okay.
Um, Hoarding is not laziness. People can put a tremendous amount of effort into gathering these things. It's not a matter of laziness. People think it's lack of standards. Absolutely not. People think, oh, it's a lack of responsibility. It is practically the opposite because every object that you own becomes your responsibility. And so they're taking on more responsibility of all these objects that now they're in charge of.
Mhm.
People think it's a lack of intelligence. There is zero correlation between intelligence and hoarding disorder. So a lot of these stereotypes simply aren't true. Some of the symptoms that are present, um, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety in releasing an object. Um, like I said, if somebody has depression and they don't have anxiety, or I'm sorry, if a person has depression and they have no hoarding disorder, they're okay with someone coming in and helping them clear out. That's not distressful for them.
Mhm.
Difficulty categorizing and organizing. It's really hard to separate into, where do these items go? Does WD-40 go with the tools? Does it go with the solvents? Does it go with the cleaning supplies? Like, where does that go? Um, and the organization, I work with so many people that say, I don't have too much stuff. I just need to organize it better. I just need to get a bookshelf. And the truth is that you cannot organize too much stuff. If there's too much stuff, it can't be organized. There's a lot of difficulty with indecision, with the seeing the potential for things. How could I get rid of this? Envisioning a future where this item could be useful or needed. There's a lot of distress about the possessions themselves, embarrassment around the possessions, keeping it secret. And you're a therapist, you know how corrosive secrets
Mhm.
can be.
Oh yeah.
Um, and one of the big indicators for that hoarding is a problem is functional impairment. A lot of people have clutter. I don't know that I've been into a home without clutter, but it's when people can't use their bed. They stop sleeping in the bed because there's not enough space on the bed. When their plumbing has a problem, but they can't have a plumber in because the plumber can't access the main valve. Um, is that what you call it? What is it? The main valve?
I think
The
so.
shut off?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But people
Uh,
get yeah, I think we all know what you're talking about. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so the functional impairments, their house stopped working. And because it's a gradual, insidious situation, people will adapt. Oh, so now I sleep on my couch. That's fine. Oh my gosh, my couch got filled, so now I sleep on my recliner. Um, oh, you know what? My stove doesn't work, but I still have a microwave. I don't need to have someone come in and repair the stove because my microwave works.
Mhm.
And it just becomes more and more of a buildup of a dysfunctional household.
that makes sense. Okay. Um, so I went online and looked a little bit about, checked up a little bit about hoarding and stuff, and I guess there's different types of hoarding. So what are the types of hoarding?
Well, it can definitely, um I wasn't quite sure what you meant by this question, but I definitely have some answers and help me along if I'm not answering the
Okay.
question. Um, so definitely people will hoard specific topics of things. It's actually unusual to encounter people that save everything. There tends to be categories.
Okay.
Um, People that will hoard food, people, this is the toughest one, people that will hoard animals, um,
Mhm.
people that were, oh my gosh, vacuum cleaners.
Mhm.
It's unusual. Like most people are like, "Oh, I have a vacuum cleaner. Maybe I have one vacuum cleaner that's easier for the stairs and another vacuum cleaner for everything else." I don't think that's unusual, but you'll encounter people with 20 and they picked them up from the curb thinking I was going to repair them and I'll share them with people. But vacuum cleaners is like you don't see hoarded microwaves the way you see hoarded vacuum cleaners. Um, Hoarded pens. I think a lot of households have a lot of pens. I used to be a waitress, and so I had a
Mhm.
disproportionate number of pens, but I was okay throwing them out when they stopped working.
Mhm.
And so that's part of how you know it's not a problem. If people throw out broken pens, that's not a problem. They just have too many pens.
Mhm. Yeah.
So types, people hoard memories. People hoard emergency items. Um, but people don't typically hoard from all of those categories. Does that kind
Yeah.
of make sense?
Yeah, I think that's what I was looking at too, is like what types of hoarders are there? Like what there's different types. Like they're collecting different items and stuff. That's I guess that was the question. So thank you for answering that. And then the last couple questions. So how do you actually treat hoarding? Like how do you treat it?
So first of all, I like people to understand from the beginning that this is a long process. It took a long time to get to the point where people were having enough trouble that they sought help, and it is unfortunately not a quick fix.
Mhm.
Um, I always start just talking to people, getting to know them, creating that relationship of trust. It's exactly what you do in your work. It's the creating that therapeutic relationship.
Mhm.
Then we start talking about what else might be going on. Is somebody, um, oh, this is a thing that happens is there will be deaths, and from deaths, people will inherit objects, and they'll inherit a lot of objects, like entire households of furnitures, and they will have had multiple relatives die, and so now they actually have 3 wardrobes from people who have passed, um, and so there's all this grief bound up in their objects, and so I do a lot of grief work with people. I do a lot of work with, um, common mental health issues like depression and anxiety. I have definitely seen people improve their hoarding behaviors when they go on an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication because they're using the hoarding to cope with feelings of discomfort.
Mhm.
Um, Hoarding can also come from loneliness, that going shopping is an outlet, it's an activity, it's fun, it's social, it's out of the house. And so one of the ways to treat hoarding disorder can be to help them cultivate closer relationships, help them find alternative activities and hobbies that don't involve acquiring stuff. Um, and it's not like the TV shows. Um, what you see on the TV shows is a forced clean out. And those are for emergency situations. I have not seen good results from forced cleanouts. The behaviors aren't going to change. In fact, that behaviors might increase because there's now an added trauma.
Mhm.
And we know that trauma leads to an increase in mental health
Mhm.
issues.
Yep.
And so they have the trauma of losing all their stuff. Think about how people feel when people came into their home. stole objects, and it was just the TV and the couch and some jewelry, but imagine how distressful that is.
Mhm.
And it's as if people stole all their objects. Um, so it's a slow process. It's a learning process, teaching people how do you what are other ways to manage feelings? What are other activities to have? Healing from some past issues, um, managing some other mental health issues better. And so that's a lot of what treating hoarding disorder is about.
Okay. Yeah, this is the last question I was gonna ask about the TV show. On A&E, you watch I think they have, like, 15 they're on their 16th season, like, this year,
Yeah.
and just watching that and see how, they hire people to go in and start throwing stuff away, that's just yeah, that I can see that as really traumatizing. Yeah, I can see that, definitely. But there's 16 seasons of that, so people watch it and think, "Oh, that's how you're gonna treat it." That's necessarily true at all. It's not true on how you should treat someone who has hoarding. Yeah.
And they do have people who, they're like, oh, we gave them aftercare funds.
Yeah.
But if you listen to the end of the show, most people don't do that follow-up aftercare.
Yeah.
I recently did an education thing online, and one of the people had been on a number of the hoarding shows as an expert, and consistently said through his lecture, I would not do that again. I used to watch those hoarding shows. That was part of what got my interest going in working with people of this population.
Mhm.
And now watching them is hard and painful for me because I see how they're damaging to people.
Yeah, I see that.
The benefit of the shows is that it does give more awareness that this is a problem.
Mhm.
Um, when we say that this is affecting 1 in 20 households, which is a rough estimate, we don't know. Most hoarding situations are not as dire as what we see on the shows. And it's one of the things, like so many things with mental health, the earlier you can have intervention, the less likely it is to get to the point of what we see on those shows where people are living in dangerous environments. And so by having awareness, people might seek help knowing that that help is out there.
Uh-huh.
Um, People might be like, "Oh, I've noticed this with my neighbor. I wonder what support they need."
Right.
And so the awareness is good.
Mhm.
I think people didn't really know a lot about hoarding. In fact, the word hoarding as a disorder is only the most recent DSM.
Mhm.
It's not a terminology that was used prior to the 90s, although there were certainly people that had issues with stuff.
Yeah.
It was pack rats, it was collecting, it was different terms. Um,
Right.
Typically, when I'm working with people, I understand the clinical term is hoarding disorder, and I obviously talk about hoarding,
Yeah.
but I also tend to use words like clutter
Clutter.
with people because it's just clutter. It's just a lot of clutter. It's dysfunctional clutter. Um, but I don't know. There's something about the word hoard that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, even for me, saying that word is uncomfortable, like cluttering and all that. That sounds a little bit better. Yeah, for sure. And I guess the last question I have, it's I didn't send you the question, but has to do with insurance. Do you know if insurance covers the hoarding disorder, or how does that go about? Do you know anything about that?
So this is a really difficult. Funding is a problem.
Uh huh.
Um, so I actually work with the Dane County Hoarding Task Force, and a lot of what we get together once a month and somebody talks and presents and we learn.
Okay.
There is not a lot of funding for this. Insurances will pay for um, therapy.
Mhm.
And one of the great benefits of having it in the DSM is that you can diagnose hoarding disorder and bill an insurance company if you take insurance.
Uh huh.
Um, but the funding isn't there. There are a couple resources. Um, if you are on, I'm so sorry, I mix this up all the time. I want to say Medicaid, but I do mix up Medicaid, Medicare, that are happening at a local level. Um, but I absolutely know that those funds ran out a long time ago this year. Um, And
Okay.
then to have people come into your home to do that high level of clean out
Mhm.
is 10 or $20,000. It is a lot of money. Um, to have people that have, um, a problem with hoarding, but not to the degree that you see on the shows.
Uh-huh.
There are some other people who may be appropriate. There are professional organizers. I will go into people's homes and help them declutter. I can't move furniture, but I will help learn the process
Mhm.
of how to make the decisions. How do you choose what objects to part with? But the resources really aren't out there. I've been working for a couple months now. I would love to have a hoarding disorder consultation group, and maybe this doesn't belong in the podcast, um, but it is hard to find other people that are working with this. At one point, I had a 6-month contract in another county because they could not find another person in their county
Uh-huh.
that would work with hoarding disorder.
Okay.
So, if any of your listeners are interested in working with hoarding disorder, there is definitely a need for it.
Mhm.
Um, And absolutely, anyone can reach out to me and ask questions because I'm pretty accessible. I do answer my phone.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously not all the time, but
Right.
if it rings and I'm able to, I do answer my phone.
Awesome. So that's the last question. Where can someone who has questions or is looking for help, where can they find you? Do you have like a website or anything?
So my email address, and I'll give this to you so you can put that out there if you'd like,
Yep.
is Margot at couragecounselingmadison.com.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook under Courage Counseling. You can Google me and find my website. I'm Courage Counseling. There are a few other Courage Counselings in the country. I'm the only Courage Counseling in Wisconsin.
Okay. So definitely you I will provide that information in the comment box before I publish. I can put all that information on there. So if someone does needs to if some my mind just went blank. So if someone needs to look for your website, I'll have the website in the comments and all that stuff too, so people can look into it. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we end this podcast, this episode?
Um, Definitely, there is some information out there. There are helpers out there. Um, there is a scarcity in helpers, and it is tricky.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on this podcast. I'll definitely provide the information, how to find you and all that in this um the comment box, I forgot what you call it, before I publish and all that. All the information that you're looking for, her website and all that, will be posted into the comments of the podcast. And again, thank you so much for coming on, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. I want to thank Margot Nelson for being on this podcast and talking about hoarding. I hope those who have listened to this episode, I hope you learned a bit about the topic on hoarding. I will be posting information on how to find Margot if you have questions or you want to talk to her. I will be posting her email and her website as well, so you can get in contact with her if you have questions or if you yourself need to talk to her. Um, Also, if you could rate and review this episode, I'd appreciate it. Also, click the follow button so when I do have a new episode up, you'll get a notification. I think there's a bell symbol up on the right hand corner. If you click on that, that'll give you notifications of when I have a new episode up. I also have a Facebook page, a Path to New You, where you can contact me, and that is also a place where I'll be posting a link to this um, podcast as well. If you could like my Facebook page, I'd appreciate it. So then you get the information that I post on mental health and veterans issues. I also have a Facebook page for my private practice, New Beginnings Counseling LLC. And if you have questions or concerns and you would like to talk to me, you can send me a message through that Facebook page as well. A PEP, New Beginnings Counseling. Again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, thank you for your time to listen to this episode. I appreciate it. I will not be having a new episode next week. I will not be doing a new episode next week due to Thanksgiving. I will be doing a new episode the following week, so in about 2 weeks. And I hope you all have a great rest of the week, a great Thanksgiving if you celebrate it. And please take care of yourself. And until next time, be well.